Welcome to the Nutra Voice, the podcast that cuts through the clutter of supplements to help you make confident and informed decisions. I'm Evelyn Reinson.
And I'm Chris-Maré Agenbag.
Today, we're joined by Loren Israelsen, President and founder of the United Natural Products Alliance. Loren is a true pioneer in the dietary supplement industry, with over 4 decades of experience shaping global standards for safety, science, and quality. He's co-founded key coalitions, lectured around the globe, and earned numerous awards for his groundbreaking contributions. Loren, welcome. It's a privilege to have you here.
Thank you, Evelyn. It's my pleasure to join you.
Loren, let's start with a simple but important question. How are dietary supplements regulated in the United States? And what's important for consumers to know?
Turns out that is not as simple a question as you might think. If you go back into our history, until 1994, when the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act was passed, which we commonly call DSHEA is the acronym, dietary supplements were misregulated by the FDA. We fit in the middle between foods and drugs. And so there you have the Food and Drug Administration, and they really don't know what to do with us. So they kept putting us into the wrong categories, all the wrong places. Sometimes they wanted us to be drugs, sometimes food additives, and we wanted to be dietary supplements. That's what people know, and that's what people want. So finally, after this big battle for 2.5 years in Congress, we got our green card and became a part of the recognized Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So what are we today? We are a subclass of foods. And that's the key thing, is we're finally foods, and all of the regulations that apply to foods, plus some extra regulations just for dietary supplements. So long answer to a short question. Dietary supplements are regulated by FDA. Go to FDA's website and just type in on the search bar dietary supplements and pop. You will see a whole page. And the first line is dietary supplements are regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. So if you hear otherwise, you are being misinformed.
Great, thank you for that. We see terms a lot like certified, verified, and approved on supplement packaging. For the average consumer, that can be confusing. Can you break down what these terms mean and how they differ?
Sure, glad to. Such an important question for this reason. You go and stand at the aisle, or you look online, and you're trying to make a good choice. You want to buy a quality product, something that really works. And you also are hoping to get a fair price. Now, supplements are not inexpensive. And more, you'll see these really interesting price differentiations and wonder, well, how come something like vitamin C going to have a 100% difference in price? It's not like milk or bread at the store. What's the difference? Part of that difference is the quality that goes into making the product. It begins with the ingredients. Everything any cook will tell you, just start with good ingredients and don't mess them up. And that's what we try and do in the supplement business, is you get high quality ingredients from all over the world, and then we manufacture these into finished form. So on that bottle or in the advertising, there are lots of logos, and let's break them apart. Try and understand what makes these different. So you have one group are the certifiers. What does a certifier do? They typically will go into a facility, a manufacturing facility in our industry. They will audit and inspect the facility for good manufacturing practice compliance, their record-keeping processes, their supply chain controls and management, compliance with food and drug regulations and DSHEA. And if you successfully pass, then you are granted the right to use a logo on the label and in your advertising. So you will see a little blue dot with NSF. That's an example of a third-party certifier. The United States Pharmacopoeia, USP, you will see that if you shop at Costco in the supplement aisle, you will always see USP. Turns out Costco has adopted that as their quality standard. That's a very high and very good standard. You'll also see other kinds of certifiers. That can be for organic status, that can be for other quality designations. Organic, you see the logo, it's half green, half white, USDA. Consumers often look at that, both on dietary supplements and conventional foods. So certifiers and verifiers are third parties that will go into the facility or do a very thorough paperwork examination of the company, and you'll see that on the label. There are some countries that provide third-party certification, like Australia. What that's called TGA, very good certifier. The problem is they won't let you put that on the label. So sometimes you'll see on companies' websites that they are TGA certified. That would be great. So when I'm shopping online, I typically will look for one or more of those certifiers. More recently, there are some interesting new approaches. There's a laboratory, an analytical lab, third party, called Alchemist, and they have created the Alchemist Assured program, which is really a good one because they're testing the products day in and day out. So they have a really good ongoing idea of product quality. So they put their name behind that, and with some of their customers that are well-known brands, as you will see Alchemist Assured. So that's an example of new innovation. Now, that said, there are a whole lot of labels that are marketing labels. Nobody certified them. Nobody came into the facility. You have to be careful to look for those. If you ever see the FDA logo on a label, don't buy that product. It's explicitly illegal to use FDA's logo to sell any FDA regulated products. So just a little tip for consumers. So I would suggest that you look for true third-party certification. And that's how I shop, and I recommend that to other people.
That's a great tip, Loren. I had no idea about that.
You'd be surprised how often you see that.
I've definitely seen it, though. I definitely recall seeing it on the shelves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, back to the FDA a little bit. In episode 3, we explored the myths and misconceptions about supplements, including the belief that they are unregulated, which raises concerns about their safety. What are the steps that the FDA takes to actually ensure that supplements are safe and meet quality standards?
Right. There is a big misconception that dietary supplements are not regulated. And we've gone over that. Yes, they are. So where did that come from? There are some organizations and critics, every industry has critics, and they continue to use this word unregulated industry. But what they mean when they say that is that we're not approved like drugs by the FDA. That's what they mean. If you ask them straight up, and I have done this in conferences and meetings, and I said, are you telling me that dietary supplements are not regulated by the FDA? Then they back down and say, no, they are regulated. So, well, they say, stop saying unregulated. But it's confusing to consumers. So dietary supplements are regulated. FDA has layers of regulations. So for foods, there are a number of regulations that anyone who makes a food or a subcategory of food must comply with. Good manufacturing practices. For a supplement, you have to have a new supplement facts panel. For regular foods, you have a nutrition facts panel, but they were built in the same structure using the same concept of how to present information to consumers. That's one indication of a regulated product, that it has to have that supplement facts panel on it. The FDA has a group of investigators that go into companies to do GMP, good manufacturing practice inspections. There are third-party certifiers that we've just talked about that will also go in and look at company facilities. There's also other requirements under the Bioterrorism Act. Every company must register with the FDA. There is another law called the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA. Dietary supplements are required to comply with a number of sections of FSMA, and that is to control your supply chain integrity and to know who the original manufacturer of the ingredients that you buy, where they come from. So, and we have other regulations as well that concern levels of contaminants or adulterants like heavy metals. There are levels that you have to comply with. So consumers would be surprised actually if they were to go through the checklist that top companies in our industry go through to produce a product, and to see all of the equipment and the analytical instruments and the skills of the technicians and the technical staff is very impressive.
I wish that brands communicated this more to consumers, because this is definitely something that a misconception that's rampant in the industry.
I do too. I've encouraged many companies to say, you ought to get out there and show people what you do. And we do see more of that in some ways, which is good, is to identify who you buy your ingredients from. So that's a co-branding
Mm-hmm.
idea that we see in advertising and on labels. I think that's a really good way. It's the Intel Inside kind of approach, is that once you know, a company will tell you, they want you to know where we get our ingredients. That's a really good sign.
That's a good
And
start.
it's a good start. And then if they will show you their facility and share their regulatory history, their inspection reports, there's a lot of ways that you can really demonstrate that you're doing a really, really good job and you're reliable day in, day out. Doesn't mean people don't have problems. There's always something going on in the factory where you have to make adjustments, but that's why you have quality systems, is that you monitor and monitor, and if something is what's called OOS, out of spec, then you stop and you take a look, figure out what it is, go fix it, and carry on.
I've definitely seen an increase in companies using the term traceability, but I do think that maybe going a little step further than just ingredient sourcing and origin would be a good way to communicate effectiveness, trustworthiness to consumers.
Traceability has become really important to consumers. And we call it different things in different industries, but it's always the same principle. So provenance is a term that you will hear in some industries, meaning that we can tell you the story and the history of, like, say, it's an antique or an art piece, something like that. Traceability is a very commonly used word. Supply chain integrity is another word. Now we have a lot of technical terms, blockchain technologies that lock in transactions between the seller of the ingredient manufacturer and then the ultimate manufacturer, and even down to the brand, even to the lot number of the brand that you buy. And so today there are companies that literally can take you from the product you're holding and take you back to the farm or to the facility that produced the ingredients. And in the world where we're now so removed, we don't live on farms anymore. We're not going out in the backyard and picking tomatoes and growing and harvesting our own food. We have to rely on somebody else that we trust to make sure we're getting the right thing. And we see this with coffee, with tea. Very often you'll see designations of source and origin and relationships that brands will have to support the local communities, which I think is another important element to many consumers in the natural product industry, is that we're really taking care of a lot of farmers and families around the world who grow and harvest on our behalf. And we're seeing a growing number of companies that really make an effort to support those communities, because you have big ag on one side and then you have the small farmers on the other, very often in third world countries. So when you stop and think about how complicated this supply chain is, it's so important for that traceability to really mean something.
Absolutely. And sort of hinging on that, in terms of what we see on packaging, we also see terms like natural and organic all the time. Is there any way to verify that these terms are accurately used on products when consumers are actually looking for supplements?
Yes. First, the word natural, that's kind of become whitewash. It doesn't really mean a lot. So I wouldn't put a lot of weight into seeing the word natural. First of all, no one's defined it. It literally defies definition. Now, when we turn to organic, yes, there is a big difference. What consumers should look for is certified organic. And then there are a number of certifiers, and that will have to be shown on the product. And if it's the USDA organic, or if it's the non-GMO project, and people often say, what's the difference between organic and non-GMO? Well, if something is organic, it is by definition also non-GMO. So if you net it down, the combination of a product with a organic certification that is also non-GMO verified is what a lot of people look to as that 1-2 that helps them lock into a product that they trust. And here again, people will try and skirt around and use words like sustainable agriculture, and that may mean that they're organic, but it's a little hard to tell. So I tend to want to look for some clear confirmation on the label, and people can quickly jump on websites and have a look and see what's there. You have to just watch out for these homemade seals that try to imitate the true third-party certifiers.
Now, you mentioned sustainable, which I feel is the next new growing trend in the industry, along with plant-based supplements. How do you see these trends influencing regulations and consumer expectations?
Well, the problem with regulations, they're always a look back. It's always problems that we were trying to solve somewhere behind us. And then you have the go forward, the evolution of what's new and what's interesting. And there's always going to be a gap between, like, sustainable. What does that mean? There really aren't a lot of meaningful guidance in terms of regulations about what sustainable means and a whole lot of other terms of that sort. So you have to begin to look for other sources of authority besides a government regulation to bring
Mhm.
guidance to that. I'll add another one is precision fermentation. We're seeing that term a lot, and I don't know what that means. It means whatever the person saying it thinks it means to them. Oftentimes, it is a form of biotechnology, which many of the natural product shoppers are reluctant to buy. But we're struggling right now because technology is advancing so quickly, especially in AI and biotechnology, that regulations are trailing farther and farther behind. So this is where it becomes super important that the industry has self-policing, self-correcting mechanisms in place. And you know what? A lot of it comes right back to the integrity of the company, to its leadership, to their investments that they make. And I really think going forward for the foreseeable future is this gap between new terms, new ideas, which a lot of us, it took a while to understand and still try to understand because it's moving so fast, especially in biotechnology, that we're going to have to really kind of work hard as an internal industry because we're trying to do two things at the same time is to preserve as much of the natural characteristics of the products that we offer. And
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that they can't be processed, but it means that consumers would like to know, how was this thing made? And that's the newer and the harder question. You can answer where it's made, you can answer when it was made and who made it, but how was it made is getting a little bit trickier.
So, sort of hinging on that, the supplement industry is becoming more digitized, of course, with more products being sold online. Are there any challenges that you see in ensuring safety and quality with products being sold on e-commerce?
The evolution of, by the way, we'll start with this. Dietary supplements are one of the most popular offerings on e-commerce. They're not very seasonal. There is some seasonality, but not like fashion, not like so many other kinds of consumer goods. They're just the right size and the right price to be what they call SKU dense. So you can have a whole lot of product in a fairly small, let's say, visual window at $20 to $25. And that's exactly what e-commerce platforms love to sell. Return rates are relatively low. And as e-commerce has evolved, regulators are trying to figure out, well, who's in charge of e-commerce? And for the longest time, it really wasn't even clear. Do they pay tax? And if they do, who do they pay it to? And so yes, there is a problem, and some of your viewers may well be familiar with some of the reports that have been published by some companies in our industry about Amazon, in this case, showing that there are a there really is a problem between what the label says and what's in the label in terms of the active ingredients. Why is that happening? If you look at the brands that are being sold on Amazon, it breaks into the national brands and then into the Amazon only brands. So the second group, the Amazon onlys, I tend to refer to them as the ghost ships of e-commerce. You don't know where it came from, you don't know who's on board, and you don't know who made it, and you can't find them when you want to go see what they're doing. Advice to all consumers is when you shop on e-commerce is to be as cautious as you can and stay with reliable e-commerce platforms. Well, Amazon is the biggest here in the US, but they continue to struggle with supplements. We have talked with them at length. They're well aware of the nature of the problem. They have set up a system to have their products tested by three organizations, but there's still work to be done. If it's an unfamiliar name, brand name, And there's a lot of those. It's not just, I was looking for a little mini tramp bouncer or rebounder. I had to get my language right. And not a single one was a brand name I recognized. So you're in the dark. You're really trying to make a decision without feeling very informed about it. FDA's had a heck of a time trying to figure out how to police e-commerce sites, partly because it's so fast and so fluid. Products pop up and disappear daily. I was at a meeting and was told, and I think on good authority, that Amazon makes something like 3 billion edits, changes, or corrections a day on their platform. I mean, that's how fast and dynamic this all is. So if you choose to buy products, dietary supplements on e-commerce platforms, is stick with brands that are well known and well trusted. Unfortunately, even there's been some counterfeiting going on. And for a long time, there were some leading brands that did not want to be on e-commerce platforms, but they were there anyway. How did they get there? And so this reseller problem is still a continuing issue. But it's here. I think COVID, as we all saw, supercharged e-commerce sales. And we can all criticize it, but we all do it. And we're buying on e-commerce. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how can we improve the situation. Best advice I can give you right now is the simplest advice is don't talk to strangers.
Now, I see some of these products say third-party tested. Now, how does that relate and to trust? And how does that help a brand? And is that always make a product more reliable?
No, third-party tested should almost always come with, and by who? Who is the third party? So you need to see the seal. You need to see some evidence of who that is. And then it means something. But just the term third party, this or that, I don't think is meaningful.
Right. Well, thank you. On that note, trust and safety are crucial for consumers. What is the UNPA doing to help build trust and ensure supplements meet high standards of safety, quality, and transparency?
Wow, we're doing a lot. I'll just give you a sampling, is that we have regular quarterly meetings with FDA, with the head of the Human Foods Program at FDA, and we have an agenda, and we will point out issues that we think they need to be paying attention to. There are monthly meetings among the leading trade associations as we're looking and talking about quality problems and issues. Very often, there will be a flare-up of some kind, and it's usually products that are not dietary supplements, but they're labeled as supplements. So we're trying to weed those out of the industry. Sometimes FDA will ask us to do something. Sometimes Congress will ask us to do something. We try to take as much initiative as we can, both as UNPA and our partner organizations. So one thing we do is work through a system of MOU, or Memoranda of Understanding agreements. These are with universities, with quality certifiers and organizations, and collectively that brings the best of expertise in areas that we know a lot, but not nearly as much as them. So we call on this brain trust to help us think through and work out problems. And that's proven to be a very effective tool. Maintaining consumer trust and confidence is job number one, day in, day out. And we're at a time right now when public trust in institutions, government in particular, is at kind of low tide. And FDA has been very open about it and said we have lost a great deal of consumer trust and we must earn that back. And that's the thing I fear the most is should the day come that we lose that general trust and support of our consumer, that'll be a bad day. That'll be a too Excedrin day, probably.
Now, beyond helping consumers, which you do on a daily basis, and working with the FDA, who else does UNPA work with in the industry that shape the policies that prioritize safety and transparency?
We work with, for example, the FDA's Office of Dietary Supplement Programs. We know the staff very well. We're in very frequent conversation with them. We work closely with the U.S. Pharmacopeia. They're the body that sets the official standards and methods. We work with AOAC International. They're also a standard-setting body that establishes quality standards. We work with the National Institutes of Health Office of Dietary Supplements. We work with the United States military through the Department of Defense. on warfighter nutrition and dietary supplement safety. We work with the National Center for Natural Products Research at the University of Mississippi. We've been an active supporter and participant with them for nearly 15 years. And that's the top of the list. There's a number of other organizations. So we spend an awful lot of time collaborating, working with this large community of organizations that collectively our job is to support consumers by high quality products, safety standards, analytical testing standards and capabilities. So as the industry evolves and we're dealing with new technologies, that we're trying to advance our own ability to understand and then deal with whatever that new problem may be. So you wake up in the morning and very often you don't know what it's going to be, but something will pop up and we're after it.
It's truly amazing work.
Absolutely. Switching gears for a moment, how do the regulations for supplements in the US compare to other countries? Are there any global practices you think that we could learn from or even adopt?
Yes, I have spent a lot of time, traveled a lot over the years to a lot of countries, both to meet with regulators, with their industry representatives. And I can tell you that the United States is unique. Our law, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, is a one of a kind. No other country has a system like this one. And I believe the reason is it's the populist culture of the United States, where the people have been so involved for decades and decades in trying to protect the right to buy and use supplements that we literally have formed our own culture where we rise up against the Congress and the government and the FDA and we battle. And so far we're 3-0, so we're doing pretty well in that regard. That said, no other country has that sort of consumer activism. So when you look at the EU, boy, these days they're not the best example of how do you regulate supplements. It really feels like they've gone too far.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Australia, they have a great system, a great model through the Therapeutic Goods Administration, or the TGA, but they decided to treat dietary supplements as complementary medicines. So they put them over in the drug side. We're over on the food side. Then you have Canada, and they have natural health products, which is kind of a blend between the United States and Australia. Then you have Korea and Japan and Taiwan that have really strict systems. Then there's China that has its own dietary supplement-like regulations, but they also have a tremendous history in TCM.
Mm-hmm.
And so their system is quite different than the US, India, Ayurveda. So when you look at the global system, the United States really stands unique among them all. And as it turns out, is over the last 30 years, if we use that as a time measure, and if you measure success based on growth of industry and revenue, expansion of market, innovation, new companies, new players entering the market, and an excellent safety record, the United States is number one in terms of our growth rates, the continued activity of the industry. So the bottom line is, I think that I can say with confidence that DSHEA has proven, controversial as it was in the beginning, has proven to be a very effective law to do what it was designed to do, which was to create broad consumer access, the ability to have innovative ideas and a mechanism to bring these to market. So as I look around the world, I can't honestly say, well, I wish we were like, and fill in the blank. I think we're doing pretty well over here.
So it's fair to say that you feel that the evolution of regulations is positive for U.S. consumers.
I do. And I think as we look at where we are today, that we have this extremely interesting moment in time politically when we have a new administration coming in, and some of that new leadership that have been nominated for positions high in government, cabinet level. And this includes the Health and Human Services, HHS, Medicare, Medicaid, FDA, CDC, and NIH. And all of the nominees for those positions hold a very different view about the role and benefit of dietary supplements than any of their predecessors ever. And this is an exceptionally interesting moment in my judgment. I think if we really think this thing through well, we'll see this as one of the most fruitful and productive periods in the history of our industry to try and get to how do we help this country stay more healthy, that the status quo just isn't working. Robert Kennedy Jr., his central message has been, how come we spend the most money and we rank below Cuba in overall health? And no dish on Cuba, it's just you'd think for the amount of money we're spending, we're getting worse and worse. We're less healthy, we're more obese, we have more diabetes, kind of more of everything that we don't want to be more of everything. And he's saying we got to change the system. And he's a big believer that diet, nutrition, lifestyle, supplements, a lot of things that I would say the orthodoxy is not as keen on. There are opportunities here to really establish policy that will allow people broader choice, and I think also give us new incentives to demonstrate what we're capable of doing by, for example, granting us the right to use HSA, FSA cards to be able to buy supplements. Our money ought to be able to spend it, at least in part, in buying what we think is important, and that would be one. I think we can clean up the CBD mess that was created a few years ago. I'd like to see that. DSHEA is 30 years old. We have a structure function claims mechanism. So we can talk about helps promote restful sleep. And at the time, 30 years ago, wow, that was fabulous because we couldn't even say that. But now as we look at where we are, is we live in a digital age and DSHEA was built in an analog world. So we need to somehow find a way to be able to say what's truthful, but not misleading, that give people more, I would say, precise understanding of the benefit of our products. That would be, I would say, the greatest, most positive change that we could see coming forward. Then there's AI. I mean, we could talk for the whole day about just how AI is going to be transforming so much of our daily lives for good and bad. But we have to also build that factor into this. I've always been reluctant to say it's time to go look at amending DSHEA. I think that's a really risky business. But I'm now of a mind to say, we should just think about it. That if there's a moment where positive change is possible in this political environment, maybe it's now. And this may not last very long. So I think that we have to come together as an industry and say, what are the possibilities? What does it take to try and explore some of these questions? Who do we need to talk to about these things? My plea to all of us is, irrespective of our ideological beliefs, we should have a common desire to serve our consumers for whatever is in their best interest, and to understand what that means, their best interest.
I think consumers sometimes forget that the same products that they ate years ago have changed. The ingredients have changed. The manufacturing processes have changed. You hear people say, well, I grew up eating this and I'm fine. But if you compare the ingredient labels, the product is certainly not the same. And many products, even if you compare the labeling to EU or other countries, they definitely don't contain the ingredients that are permitted to be included in US foods.
Right.
I saw something online the other day, and it had U.S. candies that were imported into a EU country, and they were required to have a warning label on them because many of the ingredients are not permitted.
And I think I saw that same report you did, Evelyn. I think that was Sweden was where that was.
Yes.
Boy, I think that question in people's minds is, so we're feeding kids stuff here that most other countries don't allow. Why are we doing that?
Yeah.
And what effects is that having on all of us? Who's in charge of trying to figure that one out? Well, here we have this point of the perfect storm. Sounds it's like the good perfect storm. The combination of a political change, a sudden rise in this awareness and understanding, where California state is in part responsible for saying, hey, if the federal government isn't going to make changes to get some of these colors and dyes out of our foods, then we're going to do it. And that's an example of the consumer saying, well, why does California have to do it? FDA, why aren't you doing this? How come other countries are doing it? And what's happening here? The more, my sense is, the more our consumers can see us as advocates to advance the kind of changes like those, is to support sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture, for example, to clean up the food supply. And this is going to be a food fight, literally, is you've got a lot of invested, very big industries that, they're not going to go willingly into this new world. And so people will need to know and want to know, okay, what side are we on? I mean, how are we going to support positive change, and what does that look like specifically? So golden opportunity for us to stand tall and champion what I think our consumers would really like to see. We should be agents of change right now.
Absolutely. So sort of elaborating on that and looking into the future, what change do you think we'll see in the supplement regulations over the next 10, even 20 years?
Boy, I have trouble thinking through next week. So I'll give you my sense of what I think the next 2 years might look like. I do believe we're going to see a rapid uptick in both the activity and the action steps of removing chemicals out of the food system. I think that's probably going to be really high on the list of things. I think that there's going to be some revolutions in the analytical technology of how we test our products. But that goes along with the first project, which is how do we deal with heavy metals? And at what levels can you realistically get your product down to? FDA has a big initiative called Closer to Zero. There are other initiatives that are really trying to reduce the number of heavy metals that are found in the food supply. I think I support those, but there are practical limits of how far you can really do that. And the analytical technology to do it sometimes gets ahead of what we're able to do. So we know it's there, but we can't do anything about it. And that we have to explain to people yeah, we can see it, but we can't get to it, and do our very best to find cleaner sources would be part of that answer. So I see that happening because there's new leadership on the food side of FDA, and that's what they're all about right now, is really how to go back and look at a lot of these old approvals like from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s of food additives, some grass affirmation products or ingredients, and say, well, okay, now we can do better than that. And then we're going to get into some of the tough ones like high fructose corn syrup. One area that I think is growing very quickly is people's understanding of glycemic index and glycemic loads. And and in our household, that's very much on our mind. So, and it's fascinating to see how you used to eat and you run the math and say, whoa, and then you begin making changes, and how quickly you can really improve your glycemic load and what a difference that can make. And especially for children, I think we can make a big difference. I'm not directly answering your question here, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of trend lines.
Yeah.
I think that we're going to see, first of all, there's a trend I really don't like at all, which is to de-bitter foods and vegetables, especially vegetables. Kids don't like them. They think it's too bitter. And to say, you know what? Your body needs bitter. That's how your body works. And so to de-bitter agricultural products is a terrible idea, in my opinion. And I think a trend that we're going to see is the introduction of more bitters-based products of all sorts, and to look at the more, I would say, a global traditional diet. And the American diet is sweet, really sweet. And you look at the Asian diet and the European diet, and they have their favorites, but boy, not nearly as sweet as the American diet. And we moved to very high glycemic index sweeteners that are crazy high. And so trying to figure out how we can balance all these things out is really going to be important, difficult, lots of education involved. But that's the forefront, I think, of where we're going to go. To the question of regulations, I suspect a lot of the changes that are needed will come by innovation rather than regulation. So I'm going to say 20% is going to be regulation, 80% is going to be innovation. And I think that's about the right ratio that we should be looking at. A lot of it is we can do it ourselves. We don't need a regulation to tell us to do it. Plus, it's way too slow to go through the whole process of discussing and writing, getting public comments. Then you have a compliance period. we're talking 5 years with most regulations before anything happens, where innovation can happen from one trade show to the next. And that's the cycle people are looking for right now. We're all, our attention span is about the same as a fruit fly. We just we expect things to happen like now.
Yeah.
It's true. What do you think that the relationship between innovation and regulation should be?
Well, that's always the it's a chicken egg problem. Is innovation will sometimes trigger this. Wait a minute, we don't know what we're doing. Regulation steps in to try and put balance on it. So AI is a great example right now of, do we know what we're doing here? And so there we need regulation in my judgment. But you hope that the companies that are doing the work that none of us really understand are doing that in our best interest. So we need, I would say, the concrete boundary lines, but those are regulations, and that's a lot more work. Where the innovation part is, better ideas, and the market will tell us very quickly if that's a good or bad idea. And
It always does.
It always does. And our industry is well known for being a fast incubator. We see a lot of the ability to innovate. Whereas big food, big pharma, kind of big anything, and we're semi-big, but still not that sort of big, is they get all twisted up in their rules, and so they come to our trade shows and with their checkbooks in their pockets, and it's to say, well, here's a great little young brand with a neat idea, and they buy them. And so the innovation as you get bigger, innovation slows down. It's when you're small and you're about to go out of business that you get really creative. That's when the good ideas really flow, along with a whole bunch of adrenaline. Yeah. And I hope that we can stay, especially right now during this very fluid period, is to kind of live on that boundary line of kind of scaring ourselves every day and keep saying, all right, does this still make sense? Are we doing the right kinds of things? It's pretty edgy, but let's keep pushing this until we can see if this is a good approach, and then move on. It's so rare that you have a combination of, let's say, government and industry and the public all kind of converging and thinking, this is a time to really get on top of some of these big problems that all we can do is talk about it and spend more money and get nowhere. So we know it doesn't work. And so let's try a new way. I think that kind of tectonic shift and change is often what's required to see the kind of change that's required.
Loren, this has been such an incredibly insightful conversation. Thank you for joining us and breaking down these very complex topics and giving our listeners the knowledge they need to make informed decisions.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. I'd love to come back and tell you how things are going in a few months, and there'll be a lot of news, I'm guessing. Yeah. So it was a real pleasure. I hope it does help some of our consumers out there better understand what is happening. And from time to time, love to work together and give them further updates.
Thank you so much, Loren. And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Nutra Voice. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And remember, in a world full of options, knowledge is your best ally for making informed choices. See you next time.